Hello everyone, my name is Zhendong Zhang, a postdoc at MIT. It's my pleasure to introduce our work on seismic image of mantle discontinuities. This is joint work with Jessica, Frederick, and Tarek. So in the following slides, I will show you how we can get the high-resolution image of mantle discontinuities in the Hawaii area, as shown here. Our motivation is try to find a high-resolution image method to image the discontinuities in the mid-mantle area. As shown here, we have a velocity perturbation in the mid-mantle. And after 10 iterations of waveform tomography, we find that the inverted velocity perturbation is still smeared along the wave path, which is the nature of the waveform tomography method. However, if you look at the reverse time migration image, and you can find that the resolution is much higher than a tomography image. Let's first focus on the basics of tomography and migration. As shown here, we have a source and a receiver pair and a potential reflector. In practice, tomography updates will rely on the transmission waves, and the updates are the first finesse zoom of this wave path between the source and the receiver. However, migration is different. Migration relies on the reflections that are generated by the discontinuities of the Earth. For one source and receiver pair, you can get an isokernel of the migration image, and by stacking multiple sources and receivers, you will get the stationary phase of this reflector. So let's see how reverse time migration can help with image the mantle discontinuities in the global seismology. As shown here, these are inverse scatterings from the mantle transition zone discontinuities. By reverse time migrating these waves, we might be able to image their origins, which are the discontinuities in the mantle. These waves are usually ignored by waveform tomography because they are usually at the noise level. One advantage of the wave field-based image method is that you do not need to know each phase in the data domain, which is usually impossible because they have a lower signal-to-noise ratio. So instead, you just give them a rough time window based on a reference Earth model, and the image process will stack the coherent energy in the image domain, and the non-coherent energy will mostly cancelled out. Here we show example input data that are used by our proposed reverse time migration image method. You may notice that these are PP, PS, SP, and SS precursors. These data are also used by a more conventional image method, like the receiver's function image method. A big difference between our proposed method and the conventional method is that we do not need to separate each phases from the waveform data, which is usually very hard from a noisy data. We just build a rough selection window based on their arrival time and injecting all these precursors simultaneously to the input data. The image calculation was in a global scale. We used 600 earthquakes and more than 10,000 stations. You may notice that the US array TE data provide very dense sampling to the Earth, which will provide a very high resolution in the Hawaii area. I will show you in the next slide. We calculated the illumination map by counting the midpoints of source and receiver pairs we showed in the last slide. It is a good indicator for the final image quality. You may find that for different areas, the illumination is different. In the Hawaii area, we can have very dense illumination, which guarantees that we can obtain a reliable image for this area. Before showing the image result, I will first give you more technical details of our reverse time migration image method. We use the latest GLIDE M25 Earth model, where we consider the anisotropy, attenuation, gravity, and many other physics that are happening in the real Earth. We forward propagate the wave field from the earthquake. Meanwhile, we time reversely propagate the data recorded by receivers. In this way, we can reconstruct the history of the seismic wave field in the real Earth. We apply the image condition of these forward and back propagated wave fields. Only when these two wave fields arrives at the same location at the same time, that will be an image point, as shown by the red star. By stacking multiple source and receiver pairs, we can get a stationary image for these discontinuities in the Earth. Here we show the reverse time migration image of mantle discontinuities along the Hawaii seamount chain. We imaged the known mantle transition zone discontinuities marked by the yellow lines, and we observed a depressed contrast for the photon reflect discontinuity near the main island, and we imaged the 660 discontinuity with very high quality. But we also observed a local structure at around 1,000 km depth. By comparing the polarity with the one from 6060, we notice that there is a polarity change for this discontinuity, which may indicate a reversal of the impedance contrast. We also extract 3 profiles from this final image, as shown here, and we calculate their summation on the last panel. Here we show the peaked horizons of mantle transition zone discontinuities along the Hawaii seamount chain. We observe the thinning of mantle transition zone east-south side of the Hawaii main island, and a depression of the photon contrast at the same location. As a reference, we also extract the illumination along this line, and it shows that this line has a very balanced illumination, which indicates that the final image quality is high. To better understand the imaged mid-mantle discontinuity, we will show 4 vertical sections centered at the Hawaii main island. The first one is the west-east section, and the peaked horizon shown here is marked by the green lines. You may notice that it seems to be a local structure, and we will analyze more. This figure shows the northwest and southeast section. It seems to have a longer spanning of this mid-mantle discontinuity in this direction, which is quite close to the Hawaii seamount chain direction. It seems that the mid-mantle discontinuity disappears to the north end of this south and north section. The southwest-northeast section, as shown here, also indicates that the mid-mantle discontinuity disappears towards to the northeast side. However, we also conducted a synthetic test, and we found that these are more likely to be caused by the insufficient illumination of seismic waves. Finally, we extracted the topography of the mid-mantle discontinuity centered at the Hawaii main island. You may notice that the topography varies largely from 1,000 km to 900 km. And you may notice that there is some image insufficient areas, which is masked by the gray areas. So to validate the accuracy of our final image, we compare it with several popular tomography models. The first one is the SIM UCB-WM1 model. And we notice that the imaged discontinuity at about 1,000 km depth is quite close to a top of a plume from a tomography model, as marked by this dashed line. So this connection gives us some confidence of our final image. However, different tomography models from different groups are quite different, and we will compare more models with our final image. The second comparison was made with the GLIDE M25 model, which is also used for our migration. And in this case, we didn't find a clear discontinuity at about 1,000 km depth. Then we also compare with a little earlier S40 RTS model, and there is some heterogeneity at around 1,000 km depth, but it is still quite hard to connect our final image with this tomography model. The final comparison was made with Princeton SO5 model. There seems to be some plume tops at around 1000 km depth, but the resolution is too low to make a fair comparison. We continued with some synthetic model tests. As shown here, we add a shear wave impedance anomaly to the background GLIDE M25 model in the mid-mantle. This added anomaly will generate a similar reflection coefficient as the one from 660. We want to test our image method to see whether we can image this added anomaly, and also we want to compare the waveforms with and without this anomaly to see whether we can see some difference from the data directly. This figure shows the final image calculated by using the synthetic waveform data. It seems that we can image the added mid-mantle discontinuity accurately, and we also observed a difference in magnitudes of photon and 60-60 discontinuities. It is already discussed by some researchers that because the synthetic Earth models overestimate the contrast for the 60-60, so in the final image of the synthetic data, we observed a much stronger image for the 60-60 than the photon. Here we show the waveform difference due to the anomaly for different source and station pairs. The first example as shown here, the midpoints are falling into the added anomaly zone. As expected, we will see some waveform difference, and by looking into their arriving time of this waveform difference, these are mainly precursors, which indicates that for the added mid-mantle anomaly, they will generate some waveform difference for the precursor data, which are usually ignored by waveform tomography image method. Here is another example of the source and receiver pairs. In this case, the seismic waves should not propagate into the added mid-mantle discontinuities, and you can find that the waveform difference is very minor compared with the previous example, where the seismic waves are sampling the added mid-mantle discontinuities. The last example further confirms that if the seismic waves are not sampling the added mid-mantle discontinuities, we may not find the waveform difference. In conclusion, we observed a mantle transition zone thinning southeast side of Hawaii main island. We observed a mid-mantle discontinuity at about 1000 km depth. This discontinuity also indicates a shear wave impedance reversal at that depth. We demonstrate that our wave field-based image method can be a useful tool for global mantle discontinuity image, thanks to the development of computational resources and the deployment of dense stations. Thank you all for your attention. I'm ready for questions.